My wife was on her knees in the mud next to the doghouse, scrubbing a plastic water bowl with her bare hands, while tears carved jagged paths through the dirt on her face. Inside our $3 million Connecticut mansion, the floor-to-ceiling windows were blazing with light, and the air was vibrating with the heavy bass of a party my children were throwing with my money. I stood in the shadows of the garden gate, clutching a suitcase that suddenly felt like a lead weight, and realized that for 30 years I hadn't been building a home. I had been building a cage for the woman I loved and a playground for the monsters I had raised. I was supposed to be 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, halfway through a 14-hour flight to London for a high-stakes corporate audit. But a freak October storm had grounded everything at JFK. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to walk in, drop my bags, and tell her that I was finally taking that early retirement we'd talked about for a decade. I wanted to tell her that the bank of Dad was closing, and we were finally going to live for ourselves. But as I stood there in the freezing drizzle, watching my wife, a woman who had once managed a 500-person nonprofit with a flick of her wrist, whimper as she tried to clean up after a dog we didn't even own, the bank of Dad didn't just close, it burned to the ground. Before I show you how a man who spends his life finding hidden discrepancies in multi-billion-dollar ledgers handles a betrayal in his own living room, I want to offer a gentle reminder. Some elements of this story have been altered for narrative and educational purposes. Any similarities to real people or locations are coincidental, but the truth behind the message is meant to help you stay vigilant. Entitlement is a slow-growing rot, and sometimes you don't smell it until the foundation is already gone. My name is Thomas. I'm 58 years old. I've spent my life as a senior forensic auditor for one of the Big Four firms. I find the things people try to hide, the missing decimals, the ghost accounts, the lies buried in spreadsheets. I'm a man of facts, of logic, of structures. I thought I had applied those same principles to my family. I married Martha when we were 23. We started in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the heater rattled and the windows leaked. We were a team. She supported me through my CPA exams, and I supported her when she started her foundation for inner-city youth. When the money started coming in, real money, the kind that buys the house on the hill and the private schools, I thought I was doing the right thing by giving my children everything I never had. Our son, Brandon, is 30 now. He's a consultant, which in his world means he spends my monthly allowance on high-stakes crypto trades and bespoke suits while waiting for his big break. Our daughter, Ashley, is 27, a social media influencer who treats our home like a free film set and her mother like a personal assistant who doesn't get a lunch break. I was always the one in the air. London, Tokyo, Zurich. I was the provider. I was the man who made the world work so they could enjoy the shimmer of it. I sent the checks, I paid the tuition, I cleared the credit cards. I thought the silence I heard on the phone when I called home was just the peace of a well-provided life. I didn't realize it was the silence of a woman who was being slowly erased. I moved closer to the window of the sunroom, staying in the darkness of the hydrangeas. The music was loud, something modern and aggressive. I saw Brandon standing by the fireplace, a glass of $500 vintage Bordeaux in his hand, the bottle I had saved for our 30th anniversary. He was laughing, his arm around a girl I didn't recognize. "I'm telling you," Brandon shouted over the music, his voice dripping with that arrogant, unearned confidence I had funded. "The old man is never going to find out. I've already moved the primary trust signatures to the tablet. Mom signed the medical authorization papers today. She thinks it's for her shingles medication. She has no idea she just gave us full power of attorney over the liquid assets." Ashley was sitting on the white leather sofa, her feet, in muddy designer boots, propped up on the marble coffee table. "It's about time," she snapped, checking her reflection in her phone. "He's been hoarding that capital for years, and Mom is becoming a total liability. Did you see her today?" She forgot to pick up my dry cleaning because she was tired. I told her if she can't handle the basic house chores, we're going to have to look into that facility in New Jersey. You know, the one with the budget wing, Brandon chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. Don't worry, Ash. Once Dad retires and realizes the accounts are empty, he'll have to sell the house just to cover his own health care. We'll have our startups funded, and they can live in a nice, quiet 2-bedroom in Florida. Or a cage, whichever is cheaper. I felt a coldness settle in my gut that was sharper than the October wind. My own children. The boy I had coached in Little League. The girl I had walked to her first day of kindergarten. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively digging the grave. But then, the back door creaked open. Martha stepped into the sunroom. She looked small. She looked fragile. She was wearing an old tracksuit, her hair disheveled, her hands red and raw from the cold water outside. She looked like a servant entering a palace she wasn't allowed to inhabit. "Brandon, honey," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "The dog bowl is clean. Can I come in now? It's starting to freeze out there." Brandon didn't even look at her. He just gestured vaguely with his wine glass. "Did you finish the guest house floors, Mom? Ashley's friends are staying there tonight. I don't want them smelling the old people scent you leave everywhere." "I did them this morning, Brandon," she said, her lip trembling. I'm very cold." Ashley groaned, rolling her eyes. "God, Mom, stop being so dramatic. You're fine. If you're so cold, go make us some of those appetizers Brandon asked for. The caterers are too expensive, so you're the kitchen staff tonight, and try not to cry into the shrimp this time. It ruins the salt balance." A roar of laughter went up from the group of friends gathered around them. None of them spoke up. None of them looked at my wife with anything but amusement or boredom. Martha stood there for a heartbeat, her head bowed, a silent statue of a woman who had given her entire life to people who viewed her as a disposable commodity. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard the leather groaned. My first instinct was to storm through that glass door. I wanted to grab Brandon by his bespoke lapels and throw him into the mud he had forced his mother into. I wanted to take Ashley's phone and shatter it against the marble she was staining with her boots. But I'm an auditor. I know that if you catch a thief in the middle of the act, they'll find a way to lie. They'll pivot. They'll play the victim. Brandon would say he was joking. Ashley would say I was misinterpreting the situation. They would gaslight Martha until she believed she was the one who was crazy. No, I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a foreclosure. I backed away from the window, moving silently through the dark garden. I walked back to the garden gate, slipped out onto the quiet, leaf-strewn street, and kept walking until I reached the end of the block. My heart was pounding, a rhythmic drum of pure, calculated fury. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I usually only used for work. "Elias," a voice answered. It was my private investigator, a man who specialized in the kind of deep-dive asset tracking that makes lawyers weep. "I thought you were over the Atlantic." "The flight was canceled, Elias," I said. My voice was as cold and flat as a balance sheet. "And I need you to start a live trace on my personal family trust. I also need you to pull the last 6 months of credit card statements for Brandon and Ashley Vance. Every cent, every location. Everything okay, Tom?" "I'm performing an unscheduled audit, Elias," I said, looking back at the distant glow of my mansion. "And I think I'm going to find a lot of uncollectible debt. I also need you to contact my attorney. Tell him I want to discuss a total asset relocation first thing tomorrow morning." "You sound different, Tom." "I am different," I said. "I've spent 30 years providing a lifestyle. Tomorrow I start providing a lesson." I checked into a nondescript Marriott near the airport. I didn't sleep. I spent the night on my laptop, accessing the ghost folders I had set up years ago for security. I watched the numbers. I saw the transfers Brandon had mentioned. He had been clever, moving small amounts, using Martha's digital signature to bypass the secondary alerts. He had drained nearly $400,000 in the last quarter alone. He thought he was a genius. He thought he was playing a game with an old man who was too tired to check the math. He forgot one thing. I'm the man who taught him the math. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, a pale, weak light that offered no warmth, I sat at the small desk in the hotel room and looked at the final report Elias had sent over. They had been planning this for a year. Brandon's consultancy was a shell. Ashley's influencer brand was hemorrhaging money. They were both deep in debt to people who didn't care about their last name. They needed my estate, not because they wanted to build something, but because they were drowning, and they decided to use their mother as a stepping stone. I thought about Martha, huddled by that doghouse. I thought about the way she used to look at them when they were babies, with a love so fierce it terrified me. And I realized that the only way to save her was to destroy the world she thought she was protecting. I picked up my phone and sent a message to the family group chat. Flight delayed in London. We'll be stuck here for another 48 hours. Hope everything is quiet at home. Love, Dad. I watched the scene icons pop up instantly. Brandon responded, Take your time, Dad. Get some rest. We've got everything under control here. Ashley added, Yeah, don't work too hard. Love you. I closed my laptop. The trap was set. They thought they had 2 more days to finalize their heist. They thought they had time to wipe the mud off the floors and the tears off their mother's face. They were wrong. The Bank of Dad hadn't just closed its doors. It was about to call in every single loan, with interest they couldn't possibly afford to pay. I stood up, straightened my suit, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see an old man. I saw an auditor who had finally found the missing decimal. The demolition was scheduled for 48 hours from now, and I was going to be the only one holding the keys to the new house. The Marriott room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the rapid, rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. It was 3 a.m., and for the first time in my career, I wasn't auditing a corporation. I was auditing a murder. The slow, systematic murder of my wife's dignity and the cold-blooded theft of my own life's work. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting off my glasses. To the world, I was Thomas Vance, the high-flying executive currently stuck in a London hotel. But in reality, I was a ghost haunting the digital footprints of my own children. As a forensic auditor, I know that numbers never lie. People lie. Smirks lie. Tears can be practiced. Но балансовый отчет? Он всегда говорит правду, если ты знаешь, куда смотреть. I started with Brandon, my son, the boy I had sent to Wharton, the one I had given $100,000 startup fund for his 31st birthday. I pulled his primary credit card statements, the ones I paid every month without a second glance. The pattern was nauseating. Over the last 6 months, there were dozens of wire transfers to an offshore crypto exchange. Hundreds of thousands of dollars vanished into volatile altcoins. But it wasn't just my money. I found a secondary account, one I hadn't authorized. He had used a forged signature, my signature, to open a line of credit against the equity of our home. He hadn't just been spending his allowance. He had been gambling away the roof over his mother's head. Then I looked at Ashley, my little girl. Her influencer brand was a hollow shell. Behind the filtered photos of private jets and designer gowns was a mountain of debt. She was leasing the luxury cars for her shoots using the family's corporate account. She was charging $5,000 hotel suites to the company's client hospitality fund. They were drowning. They weren't just entitled, they were desperate. And I knew from 30 years of auditing that a desperate person is a person with no floor. They will step on anyone, even their own mother, to keep their head above water. But the most devastating discovery didn't come from the bank statements. It came from the Home Guard security archives. I accessed the saved footage from the last 2 weeks while I was on my previous trip to Zurich. I put on my headphones, leaning into the screen. my breath catching in my throat. I watched a video from last Tuesday. Martha was in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she held a glass of water. Brandon walked in, his face tight with irritation. "Mom, you forgot to sign the insurance waiver again," Brandon said on the recording. I don't remember seeing an insurance waiver, honey," Martha whispered. Her voice sounded so small, so uncertain. "I thought I signed the grocery authorization." "No, you didn't," Brandon snapped, stepping into her personal space. "We talked about this for an hour, Mom. Are you sure you're okay? You've been forgetting so many things lately. Ashley and I are really worried. It's like your mind is just slipping." "I'm not forgetting, Brandon. I've been so tired." "That's what early-onset dementia looks like, Mom," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a fake, soothing tone that made my blood boil. "Confusion, exhaustion. That's why you need to sign these papers. It's so we can help you when you can't help yourself. Do you want to end up like Grandma, wandering the streets because you didn't have a plan?" I watched Martha's face crumble. She looked at him with such pure, agonizing fear. She trusted him. She believed that her own son was her only lifeline in a world she was supposedly losing her grip on. She picked up the pen and signed the tablet. "Good girl," Brandon muttered, snatching the tablet away. "Now, go clean the guest house. The movement is good for your brain." I had to close my laptop. I sat in the dark hotel room, my chest heaving, the air feeling like it was made of broken glass. They were gaslighting her. They were intentionally making her believe she had dementia so she wouldn't question the documents they were putting in front of her. They were isolating her, breaking her spirit, and turning her into a servant in her own home, all to ensure that by the time I retired, there would be nothing left for us but the budget wing of a state facility. The PI, Elias, called at 8 a.m. "Tom, I have the report on the medical authorization Brandon mentioned," Elias said. His voice was grim. "It's not an authorization, Tom. It's a petition for involuntary guardianship. He's already filed the preliminary paperwork with a local judge who's known for being efficient with estate matters. He's used a series of recorded incidents, I assume from those cameras, to argue that Martha is a danger to herself." "And me?" I asked, my voice a jagged rasp. "He's arguing that your constant travel has made you an absentee provider, unaware of the crisis at home. He's moving to have both you and Martha declared unfit to manage the trust. He wants full control by the 1st of the month. He wants the merger payout," I said. $300 million. "Exactly. If he gets guardianship, he doesn't need you to sign anything. He becomes you in the eyes of the bank." I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city was waking up. People were commuting, drinking coffee, living their lives, unaware of the monsters hiding in the suburbs. "Elias," I said, "I need a doctor, not one of Brandon's. I need a top-tier neurologist, someone who can do a full cognitive evaluation on Martha, and I need a mobile notary who can meet me at a private location. You're going to confront them?" "No," I said. "I told you. I'm an auditor. I don't confront. I liquidate." I spent the next 12 hours in a rented office downtown, working with my attorney and Elias. We moved with the precision of a surgical team. First, I exercised the founder's clawback in the company bylaws, because I had evidence of corporate funds being used for personal luxury travel, Ashley's shoots, and unauthorized crypto transfers, Brandon's gambling. I was able to freeze their access to the corporate accounts immediately. No warning, no emails, just a card-declined message the next time they tried to buy $1,000 lunch. Next, I handled the house. The mansion in Connecticut was titled under a secondary holding company. I contacted the manager of that company and issued an immediate vacation for renovation order. But I didn't stop there. I went into the digital architecture of the house, the magic house my children loved so much. I didn't cut the power. I didn't lock the doors. I changed the permissions. I set the master controls to my own phone. I bypassed the security accounts Brandon had set up. From that Marriott room, I could now see everything, hear everything, and control every light and lock in that $3 million cage. That evening, I watched the feed. The party was over. The friends were gone. Brandon and Ashley were in the living room, surrounded by empty wine bottles and the remnants of the appetizers Martha had been forced to make. Brandon was staring at his phone, his face red with fury. "What do you mean, declined? Try the other one, Ash." "I did. It's declined, too. Brandon, what is happening? I'm supposed to pay the deposit on the Malibu villa tonight. It's a glitch. It has to be. The old man probably hit a limit or something. I'll call the bank in the morning." "And Mom?" Ashley asked, looking toward the kitchen. "She's been in there for 3 hours. Did you tell her she needs to pack the guest house linens?" "Who cares?" Brandon snapped. "She's signing the final guardianship papers tomorrow. Once that's done, we don't have to talk to her ever again. We'll have the firm, the trust, and the house. She can spend the rest of her days forgetting whatever she wants in Jersey." I saw Martha walk into the frame. She looked older, more stooped. She was holding a stack of folded towels. "Brandon? Ashley?" she said, her voice trembling. "I think I'm going to bed. My head, it really hurts. Did you finish the guest house?" Ashley barked, not even looking up. I think so. I can't remember." "See?" Brandon said, pointing a finger at her. "This is exactly why we're doing this, Mom. You can't even remember if you cleaned a room. You're a mess. Go to bed. We'll handle the papers in the morning." Martha bowed her head and walked toward the stairs. My heart broke as I watched her, the woman I had promised to protect, believing her own children's lies about her own mind. I picked up my phone. I sent one more message to the group chat. "London is beautiful, but I think I'm going to extend my trip by another week. I really need the rest. Enjoy the quiet. Dad." I watched their reactions. Brandon gave a thumbs up. Ashley sent a heart emoji. They thought they had a whole week to finalize the theft. They thought the bank was closed for the weekend. They thought the absent benefactor was safely tucked away on another continent. They had no idea I was sitting in a car 4 blocks away. I looked at the documents on my passenger seat. The forensic audit was complete. The total asset relocation was signed and notarized. The neurologist was scheduled for a 10 a.m. wellness check under the guise of a routine insurance physical, and I had one more visitor planned. A representative from the budget facility Brandon had mentioned. I wanted them to see exactly what they had been planning for their mother. I put the car in gear and drove toward my house. I didn't pull into the driveway. I parked on a side street in the shadows of the old oaks. I looked at the house, the limestone walls, the blazing lights, the silk-lined cage. It was a beautiful structure. But as an auditor, I know that when a building is built on rot, you don't try to patch the drywall, you pull the pins, you clear the site, and you make sure the people who tried to burn it down are the ones left standing in the cold. The demolition was set for 8 a.m., and I wasn't going to be late. At 8 a.m. sharp, I stepped out of my car and walked toward the front door of my house. I hadn't slept in 48 hours, and I didn't need to fake the exhaustion. My eyes were bloodshot, my suit was wrinkled, and I had intentionally left my tie loosened and my hair uncombed. To anyone looking, I was a man who had just spent 2 days in a corporate interrogation room, watching his empire crumble. I didn't use my key. I rang the doorbell. I heard the familiar scuffle inside, the sound of people who thought they had all the time in the world suddenly being forced to hide the evidence of their greed. The door swung open. Brandon stood there, holding a tablet, likely the one with the guardianship papers he'd been so eager for Martha to sign. His face shifted from shock to a thin, tight mask of irritation. "Dad, what are you doing here? Your text said you were in London for another week." I didn't answer him. I pushed past him, stumbling slightly, and walked into the living room. Ashley was there, sitting at the dining table with a laptop and a stack of what looked like real estate brochures. When she saw me, she didn't stand up. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "Thomas, you look terrible," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "Is everything okay with the audit? We were expecting a call about the merger payout." I sank into my leather armchair, the one I'd bought with my first big bonus 20 years ago. I let my head fall into my hands and let out a long, ragged breath. "It's over," I whispered. "What's over?" Brandon asked, stepping into the room, his eyes darting to Ashley. "The firm, the merger, everything," I said, looking up at them with a hollowed-out expression. "The authorities, they found discrepancies, ghost accounts. They've frozen every asset tied to my name. They think I was siphoning funds into an offshore trust. They've launched a full criminal investigation. I'm lucky they let me leave the office with my phone." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. In my 30 years as an auditor, I have watched CEOs realize they were going to prison, and I have watched billionaires realize they were broke, but the look on my children's faces was something different. It wasn't grief. It wasn't concern for their father. It was pure, unadulterated venom. Before I reveal the moment their masks completely shattered, the moment I saw the monsters I had funded finally show their teeth, I want to offer a gentle reminder. This story is a reflection of the lessons I've learned about the dangers of unearned wealth and the rot of entitlement. Some elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes, but the warning is real. Trust is a gift, but verification is a necessity. "Frozen?" Ashley shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made my ears ring. "What do you mean, frozen?" "I have a deposit due on the Malibu house today. My credit cards were declined this morning, Thomas. I thought it was a bank error." "Every account is locked, Ashley," I said, my voice intentionally flat. "I have nothing. We have nothing. The firm will likely file for Chapter 7 by the end of the week. I've been fired. My reputation is gone." Brandon slammed the tablet onto the coffee table. "You're joking. You have to be joking. You've been a forensic auditor for 30 years, Dad. How could you let this happen? How could you be so stupid to leave a paper trail that gets your accounts frozen right before the biggest payout of our lives?" "I was trying to build a legacy for you, Brandon," I lied, watching him like a specimen under a microscope. "I thought I was being clever." "Clever?" Brandon roared, his face turning a dark, ugly shade of purple. "You've ruined us. I've spent 2 years positioning myself for that partnership. I have debts, Dad, real debts to people who don't care about your discrepancies. You were supposed to be the bank. That was your only job." Ashley stood up, her face twisted into a mask of disgust. "I knew it. I knew you'd find a way to fail us. You've always been so obsessed with your integrity, and now look at you. You're a common criminal who isn't even good at it. What are we supposed to do now? How are we supposed to live?" At that moment, the kitchen door opened. Martha walked in. She was wearing her old apron, her hands still damp from whatever chore they had assigned her. She saw me, and her entire face lit up. A genuine, radiant joy that stood in blinding contrast to the darkness in the room. "Thomas!" she cried, rushing over to me. She didn't look at my wrinkled suit or my bloodshot eyes. She just wrapped her arms around my neck and held me tight. "Thank God you're home. I've been so worried. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I held her, feeling her heart racing against my chest. "I'm fine, Martha. But the money, it's gone. Everything we built. We're going to have to leave this house. We have nothing." Martha pulled back and looked me in the eye. There was no hesitation, no panic, just the same fierce, quiet strength that had supported me in that Queen's apartment 30 years ago. "It's just a house, Thomas," she said softly. "It's just things. We've been broke before. We can be broke again as long as we have each other. We'll find a small apartment. I can go back to work. I'll sell my jewelry, the pieces you gave me for the anniversaries. It'll be enough to get us a start. I felt a lump form in my throat. This woman, who had been gaslit into believing she was losing her mind, who had been treated like a servant by her own flesh and blood, was ready to sacrifice her last treasures to save the man she thought had failed her. "Sell your jewelry?" Ashley snapped, stepping toward Martha. "Are you insane, Mom? That jewelry is part of the estate. It's our inheritance. You can't just sell it to cover his mistakes." "Your father's life is more important than your inheritance, Ashley," Martha said, her voice gaining a firmness I hadn't heard in years. "His life is over," Brandon shouted, pointing a finger at me. "Look at him. He's a shell. He's a liability. And you—" He turned to Martha, his eyes cold and predatory. "You're signing those papers today. I don't care if the bank is frozen. We're taking control of the house, and we're selling it to a developer I know. We'll take the cash, and we'll leave before the feds come knocking. You and the hero here can figure it out on your own." "Brandon, stop," I said, standing up slowly. I let the broken act slip just an inch. My voice was getting deeper, steadier. "You would kick your own mother out of her home while she's struggling with her health? While your father is under investigation?" "We're surviving, Dad," Brandon said, his voice dripping with a terrifying lack of empathy. "That's what you taught us, isn't it? Protect the assets. Well, you're no longer an asset. You're a liability. And Mom is a dead weight. We've already called the New Jersey facility. They have a bed for her. As for you, I hear the public shelters in the city are lovely this time of year." Ashley nodded, crossing her arms. "It's for the best, Thomas. You clearly can't handle the pressure anymore. You've destroyed our future, so don't expect us to fund your retirement." I looked at the two of them, my own blood, my own legacy. I saw the greed, the coldness, and the absolute absence of love. I realized then that I hadn't just been a father. I had been a host for two parasites who had finally finished eating. I turned to Martha. "Do you see them, Martha? Do you see who they really are?" Martha was staring at her children as if she were seeing them for the first time. The fog of their gaslighting was finally being burned away by the sheer heat of their cruelty. "I see them, Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I see them." "Good," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I wasn't using the family group chat this time. I tapped the screen and opened the Home Guard master controls. "Brandon," I said, "you mentioned a developer. That's funny, because I spoke to a developer this morning too, but he wasn't interested in buying a house." I pressed a button on the screen. Suddenly, every television in the house flickered to life. The massive 85-inch screen in the living room began to play a video. It was the footage from the sunroom 3 nights ago. "The old man is never going to find out. Mom thinks it's for her shingles medication. She has no idea she just gave us full power of attorney." The room went deathly silent. Brandon's face went from purple to a sickly, translucent white. Ashley's mouth hung open, her phone slipping from her hand and hitting the rug. "What is this?" Ashley stammered. "Thomas, we were just joking. We were stressed." "I'm an auditor, Ashley," I said, my voice now as cold and hard as a marble floor. "I don't care about your jokes. I care about the ledgers, and your ledgers are full of forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, and premeditated elder abuse." I swiped the screen again. The video changed to the audit Elias had prepared. It showed the $400,000 Brandon had lost in crypto. It showed the luxury leases Ashley had charged to the firm. "The frozen accounts I mentioned?" I said, stepping toward Brandon. They aren't frozen by the feds, son. They're frozen by me. I invoked the bad faith clause in the corporate bylaws 3 hours ago. Your credit cards aren't just declined, they're canceled. Your leases are being terminated. And the consultancy you've been bragging about? I've already sent the evidence of your embezzlement to the firm you used to work for. I imagine they'll be calling the police by noon. Brandon lunged for me, his face contorted with rage. You old bastard, I'll kill you. But he didn't even get close. The front door opened, and 3 men in dark suits stepped into the foyer. They weren't feds. They were the private security team I had hired from the hotel. Behind them was the neurologist I had scheduled. Mr. Vance, the lead security officer said. Is there a problem? Brandon stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting between the men. He was a coward at heart, a boy who only felt strong when he was bullying a woman he thought was defenseless. The only problem is the trash in my living room, I said. I turned to Ashley. You wanted a fresh start, didn't you? Well, you've got one. Everything in this house, the clothes you bought with my money, the boots you're wearing, the phone you're holding, is corporate property. You have 10 minutes to pack 1 suitcase of things you actually earned with your own work. After that, the locks are changing. The magic house is going to be very quiet for you. You can't do this, Ashley shrieked, tears of rage streaming down her face. I'm your daughter. My daughter wouldn't pray for her mother to be locked in a cage so she could buy a Malibu villa, I said. I looked at Brandon. And you? The developer you talked to? I bought his debt. I own your promissory notes now, Brandon. Every cent you owe is now owed to me. And I'm calling the loans. All of them. Today. The room was filled with the sound of their panic, the high, frantic whispering of 2 people who had just realized that the floor beneath them had turned into a trap door. I turned back to Martha. She was standing by the window, looking out at the doghouse in the garden. She looked tired, but for the first time in years, she looked free. Thomas, she asked, is it over? Not yet, Martha, I said, taking her hand. We have 1 more meeting, with the board. I want them to see the results of the audit. But as I led her toward the door, I saw a black car pull into the driveway. It wasn't the police. It was a representative from Global Dynamics, the company I was supposed to be merging with. He didn't look happy, and he was holding a folder that I recognized. It was the medical evaluation Brandon had forged. The demolition was moving faster than I'd planned, and I realized that Brandon hadn't just been stealing my money. He had been selling my secrets to the competition. The representative from Global Dynamics, a man named Marcus Thorne, who I had known for 20 years, didn't step into the foyer like a business associate. He walked in like a man who had just discovered his primary investment was a toxic waste dump. He held up a thick red folder, the confidential medical report Brandon had used to suggest I was mentally unfit. Thomas, Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Your son came to me 48 hours ago. He told me the merger was a risk because you were losing your mind. He offered to sell me your proprietary encryption keys for $60 million under the table, claiming he needed to liquidate before the feds took everything. He said it was an act of mercy for his aging father. I looked at Brandon. My son was backed against the white marble wall, his chest heaving, his eyes darting toward the door. He wasn't the consultant anymore. He was a cornered rat, realizing that the ship he'd been trying to sink was the only one that could have saved him. Mercy, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Is that what you call it, Brandon? Sabotaging a $300 million merger and committing industrial espionage? That's not just a breach of trust. That's a federal felony. Before I show you the final crushing outcome for the parasites I raised, and the moment Martha finally saw the sun again, please take a moment to subscribe to the Otis Archive. This channel is built on the voices of those who refuse to be erased, and your support is the foundation that allows these truths to be told. I value every story you share in the comment. Have you ever realized that your greatest enemy was someone you shared a last name with? Marcus Thorne looked at Brandon with pure corporate contempt. The deal with Global Dynamics is still on the table, Thomas, but only on one condition. I want this scavenger removed from the industry, permanently. I turned to the lead security officer. Officer, I believe there are 2 people in this house who need an escort to the curb. They've had their 10 minutes. Whatever isn't in those 2 suitcases stays here. The scene that followed was a masterclass in the death of entitlement. Ashley came down the stairs wailing, clutching a designer handbag that the security guard calmly took from her hands. "This bag was a gift for my graduation," she shrieked, her filtered influencer face twisting into something ugly and raw. "Technically, Ashley," I said, checking my watch, "it was a corporate expense filed under client gifts. You never paid the gift tax. It belongs to the firm, and the firm is no longer paying for your life." Security led them out onto the manicured lawn. The neighbors, the ones Ashley had spent years trying to impress with her staged photos, stood on their porches watching as the golden children were dumped on the sidewalk with nothing but 2 carry-on bags and a mountain of personal debt. Brandon tried to shout, tried to threaten me with a lawsuit, but the sight of the police cruiser pulling up to speak with Marcus Thorne about the under-the-table offer silenced him. The bank of Dad wasn't just closed, the vault had been welded shut. I walked back into the living room and found Martha sitting on the sofa. The neurologist, Dr. Eris, was finishing his preliminary check. He looked at me and gave a slow, sad nod. "Her vitals are improving, Thomas," he said quietly. "The confusion she's been experiencing wasn't neurological. It was chemical. I found high levels of synthetic sedatives in her system, likely hidden in those appetizers or her evening tea. Coupled with the psychological trauma of the gaslighting, it's a wonder she was standing at all." I sat beside Martha and took her hand. It was finally warm. "They're gone, Martha," I whispered. "I know," she said, her voice finally losing its tremor. "I heard them, Thomas, at the doghouse, and just now. I kept waiting for them to say they loved me. I kept waiting for a single word that wasn't about money." She looked at the empty room, her eyes clearing of the fog for the first time in a year. "They never said it, not once." "We're leaving too," I told her, 6 months later. We didn't stay in the Connecticut mansion. As an auditor, I know when an asset has too much emotional debt attached to it. I sold the house to a developer who turned it into a high-end rehabilitation center, a place for people to heal rather than a place to be buried. I finalized the merger with Global Dynamic. I took my payout, but I didn't spend it on yachts or crypto. I created the Martha Vance Foundation, a legal advocacy group that specializes in protecting the elderly from financial predators and family abuse. Martha runs the board. She doesn't scrub floors anymore. She signs the checks that put people like Brandon behind bars. Brandon is currently serving 4 years for industrial espionage and forgery. Because he had gambled away his startup funds, he couldn't afford a high-priced defense. He's learning the value of $1 at 18 cents an hour in the prison laundry. Ashley moved to a small town in the Midwest where no one knows her handle. She's working as an assistant manager at a retail chain, learning for the first time in her life what it's like to stand on her own feet for 8 hours a day. She called me once, asking for just a small loan to get a new car. I told her I'd be happy to review her business plan and her last 3 months of bank statements. She hung up. I haven't heard from her since. Martha and I live in a quiet 3-bedroom house near the coast in Maine. It's simple. It's honest. The foundation is solid rock, and the only sounds we hear at night are the waves and the wind. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the old spreadsheets from that audit. I look at the numbers that tried to erase my wife's soul. And I'm reminded of a truth that I spent 30 years ignoring. Wealth without integrity is just a shiny skin over a rotten core. You can give your children the world, but if you don't teach them the value of the hands that built it, you're just funding their destruction. Looking back, the canceled flight wasn't a stroke of bad luck. It was an act of divine intervention. It was the universe giving me one last chance to find the missing decimal in my own life. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're being made to feel small in the house you built, if you see the people you love counting your gray hairs and calculating your estate, don't be afraid to perform an audit. It hurts to see the truth. It's terrifying to realize the monsters are the ones you tucked in at night. But remember this, you are the provider, you are the architect, and you have the right to close the bank whenever you want. Your dignity isn't an asset to be traded. It's the only thing that matters when the lights go out. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Has your family ever treated you like an ATM rather than a human being? How did you find your way back to the truth? I read every story, and your resilience is what makes this community a sanctuary. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otis Archive and share this video with someone who might be huddled in the mud today, waiting for someone to turn on the lights. Take care of each other, stay sharp, and never forget, a house is only as strong as the truth it's built on.